right across the Pacific.
Each week we work with local reporters. They're on the ground letting us all know what's happening in this space and what people want to hear about.
On today's show, how the weather could still be impacted from the 2022 Tonga volcanic eruption. Incredible to think about.
And how scientists are planning to use information collected from the back of boats cruising Pacific waters.
That's all coming up. This is Pacific Prepared. We need to be prepared for the future.
Helping you stay safe.
We have fixed tools, but we keep making. What happens when something goes wrong, and how do they respond to it?
From this time, before disaster strikes, every natural disaster gets worse. Pacific Prepared.
Pacific Prepared.
Pacific Prepared.
I think it's pretty hard to forget the volcanic eruption that happened in Tonga in early 2022.
Absolutely, but it eventually caused huge tsunamis with wave heights, up to 20 meters in some cases. And, Tonga was cut off from the world for the best part of twice. Imagine that.
Yeah, it was incredible, really. 2.5 years on, there's still effects from that eruption, and it could be for some time yet as well.
Fred, there could be, a lot of transformation over the years following the eruption in Tonga. More into that, we will hear from Dr. Martin Yuka from the University of New South Wales, who spoke with Pacific Report on this particular topic. Dr. Martin Yuka, lecturer at the University of New South Wales in Sydney.
Dr. Yuka, for a start back in January 2022, can you just put a little bit of context around the eruption that happened, and put that eruption that happened in Tonga in perspective for us? Like, what sort of size was it, for example?
Yeah, that's right. So it was a very special eruption in that it was very strong in terms of, the energy that got released. But what was really special about it compared to any other volcano is that it was underwater. Submarine volcano, but not too much underwater like most of the other submarine volcanoes. So, and together with the strength it has, it was strong enough to basically evaporate all the water that was above it and send all of that into the atmosphere. Normally, like land volcanoes, they would send a lot of smoke and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This volcano did produce some smoke, but not much for a volcano. But it produced 100 million tons of water vapor that got sent into the atmosphere, which is really special.
No, I was just going to say, so 100 million tons of water vapor, what would we normally expect to see sitting into the atmosphere at that stage? How does that compare to what's already in the atmosphere? If that's a stupid question or not, I'm not sure.
No, that's a good question. That's a very good question. So, compared to where we live, where there's clouds and thunderstorms and everything, it's not that much. However, what makes a big difference is that all of this got sent into the stratosphere, which is above, around the atmosphere, which is above about 10 kilometers, or in the tropics it's more starting at 15 kilometers, all the way up to 40 kilometers high. So this is a region which is very dry. There's no clouds, there's no thunderstorms or rain or anything in that layer of the atmosphere. And so locally, there was suddenly about 10 times more water vapor in the stratosphere than there usually is. And in terms of global amount of water vapor in the stratosphere, it's about 10% more than usual.
So it sort of got forced into that layer where it normally wouldn't be.
Exactly. So there was suddenly a lot more where there normally isn't. That's right.
Right. So, Dr. Uka, I'll just take you back to what you just uttered earlier about the comparison between land volcano and the underwater volcano that happened in Tonga in early 2022. So, from my understanding, from what I've studied over the past few years, there'll be probably a few days before the actual eruption, people can see some of the signs, such as the bulges on the side of the mountains, or even smoke coming out. So you said that there were So like an amount of smoke coming out from the actual spot where the eruption took place. What did people who are responsible or those who study volcano or tectonic forces based in Tonga, do you receive any information or update? What were the approaches when even if they've noticed the smoke coming out from the sea?
Yeah, so I should say that at the time I wasn't actively following this, so I really came into this once it was clear that all this water vapor came up in Serbia and that's a very special volcano. So I wasn't closely following it at the time because I don't usually look at volcanoes. But what I can say is that there was this huge eruption that we're talking about on the 15th of January was the third eruption since December. So yes, people did see smoke before. So there was already a smaller eruption in December. And then there was another small eruption, I think 3 days before the main eruption. So people would have seen smoke about 3 days before, I suspect. From what I've heard, and again I have to say I didn't follow it at the time, nobody expected a huge eruption, which eventually happened.
So if we're talking about, so you mentioned that you came to this after the eruption, obviously you hadn't been following this, and we're talking about, what was the effects of the eruption. So what have you actually been looking at after that eruption, and what have you found so far?
Yes, so what I've been looking at is to really concentrate on this water vapor that was all of this, the 100 million tons in the stratosphere. And what they would do, because there was immediately a question, the usual effect of volcanoes on climate. So once the whole eruption has happened, there's of course immediate effects like tsunamis and lava and all of this. But once this is passed, the effect on climate usually is that is a global cooling. Because usually you have all of this sulfur dioxide, which then creates sulfates, which then in turn reflect sunlight. So what a usual volcano does is, with all its smoke and sulfur dioxide, it shades Earth's surface from the sun. And the big volcanic eruptions like Mount Pinatubo or Krakatoa, there is a measurable cooling of the global surface.
And is that sort of super localized globally? Sorry to jump in. Is that hyper localized, or can you see that right across the globe, that cooling effect?
So you can see it across the globe because these particles, we call them aerosols, they are very light and they get blown across at least the hemisphere. And then depending how much there is, they can go into even the other hemisphere, especially if the volcano is in the tropics. So it is measurable on the global temperature for these big volcanoes. But now, this volcano we're talking about did not have that much of this sulfur. And so, but it had water vapor, and we know that water vapor is a greenhouse gas. So now the question was, where does this this water vapor go? So how does it distribute itself? So how long is it going to stay in the atmosphere? And will it cause global warming because it is a greenhouse gas? And so that's what we set out to do and try to study and to some extent predict.
So what's the status of that study or the analysis that was being put together?
Yeah, so what we found is that the first question we wanted to answer is how long is this water vapor going to stay there? Because as I said, there is no rain or clouds or anything that would easily remove that water vapor in the atmosphere. And so what we found is that it'll stay for about 8 years after the eruption, which means in real terms until the end of this decade, so about the year 2030. So the effects of that volcano, just by pushing all that water into the stratosphere, will be with us until the end of the decade.
What actually happens to that vapor then? So it's sort of, I can imagine it now, it's just sort of sitting above the cloud in the stratosphere up there. It's sitting at home and you said it can't get pushed down. So it only lasts for 8 years. So what actually happens to it though?
Right. So it's a very good question. So just in the stratosphere with very strong winds. So it gets blown around the hemisphere. These winds are mainly in the direction, in a eastward direction. So they're being blown around the globe at first. So it very quickly becomes, instead of a localized cloud, it becomes more like a ring around the southern hemisphere. And then it becomes, and then very slowly, it also gets pushed north and south. But that is much slower because the winds are, as I said, generally eastward or westward in the summer. And it gets blown quickly in one direction, but very slowly in the other direction. And what we see is that it took about a year, or even a year and a half, for the water vapor to reach the South Pole. And at the same time, it also crossed over into the Northern Hemisphere. And it took about another 6 months to reach the North Pole. So by about a year and a half to 2 years after the eruption, that water vapor was distributed across the entire globe. And then what happens is that over the poles there is a slight movement of air downwards because it's very cold and cold air is heavy. So you can see it, that would be a picture you could have in your mind, that it's very cold and starts sinking and takes that water vapor with it. So where it's being removed is really mostly at the poles, but it first has to reach the poles.